Bitcoin has been really on a tear lately, hitting new all-time highs. And there's all this buzz connecting this surge to some pretty bold ideas coming from former President Trump.
Hmm.
Specifically, we're talking about a potential U.S. Bitcoin reserve, a
Interesting.
concept that's got everyone talking, from seasoned investors to just casual observers.
Yeah.
There's a Forbes article by Billy Bambro that's been making the
Oh,
rounds.
yeah, I saw that one.
Tipping point. It's called Crypto Braced for $280 trillion price Bitcoin reserve after Trump picks.
Yeah, with a title like that, you know it's going to be.
And as you might guess, some of the figures being thrown around are massive. We're talking trillions of dollars, a potential offset to the national debt, even something called a capital markets renaissance.
It's pretty wild stuff.
So let's break this down. The idea of a U.S. Bitcoin reserve, what it would mean, why people are so excited about it, and maybe even touch on what some of the potential downsides might be.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how quickly the narrative around Bitcoin has shifted. Even just from a couple years ago, we've gone from a lot of skepticism and just outright dismissal from some corners to these serious discussions about national reserves and potentially astronomical values.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the article really dives into how this shift is playing out, especially when it comes to Trump's stance on Bitcoin. It wasn't that long ago, back in 2021, when he was calling Bitcoin a scam.
Right.
But here we are in 2024, and he's publicly advocating for a U.S. Bitcoin reserve.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of changing opinions. It's a tangible shift in policy and approach. Remember, Trump confirmed his plans for this reserve on CNBC, doubling down on those promises that he made at the Bitcoin 2024 conference. He's talking about creating something that mirrors the U.S. oil reserve, but for Bitcoin.
Okay, so he's serious about this. But how does he plan to get this thing off the ground? The article mentions some key appointments he's made.
Right. And these choices are interesting. He appointed Bo Hines to head up a newly formed crypto council. Then there's the tech investor David Sachs, who's going to be the White House point person for AI and crypto. But the most telling appointment might be Stephen Miran, who's known to be a Bitcoin advocate, to chair the Council of Economic Advisors.
So he's stacking the deck with folks who are, shall we say, Bitcoin friendly? That definitely sends a message about his intentions. But the article also dives into the potential impact of a Bitcoin reserve. And this is where things get really interesting.
Definitely. This is where I need to start talking about Michael Saylor, the founder of MicroStrategy. He's been a major Bitcoin proponent for a while now and has laid out this digital asset framework. Basically, he argues that a Bitcoin reserve could have some pretty incredible benefits for the U.S.
Now, when you say digital asset framework, can you unpack that a bit? I'm sure some of our listeners might be new to that concept.
Sure thing. What Saylor's getting at is a whole new way of thinking about national reserves and how they function in a digital world. Traditionally, reserves have been about holding tangible assets, like oil or gold, right? They're meant to provide stability and leverage in times of crisis or economic uncertainty. What Saylor's proposing is treating Bitcoin as a key component of that strategy, a digital asset that can potentially bring even greater stability and growth to the U.S. economy.
Okay, that makes sense. So he's not saying ditch the oil and gold, but add Bitcoin to the mix.
Yeah.
But what kind of benefits are we talking about specifically? The article mentions some pretty ambitious claims.
Saylor's not shy about making big predictions. He's talking about strengthening the U.S. dollar, potentially neutralizing the national debt, and positioning America as the leader in the digital economy of the 21st century, all by strategically leveraging a Bitcoin reserve.
Hold on. Neutralizing the national debt. That's a pretty bold statement, considering we're talking about over $36 trillion. How does he even see that happening?
Well, Saylor argues that a Bitcoin reserve could generate massive value, potentially between $16 trillion to $81 trillion, based on his projections. And that kind of influx, if it plays out, could be used to significantly chip away at the national debt.
Okay, I see where he's coming from.
Yeah.
But even if those projections are accurate, that's a long way from completely erasing the debt.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that these are just projections, and there are a ton of variables at play, but the sheer scale of those figures does illustrate the potential that Saylor sees in a U.S. Bitcoin reserve.
Right. And to his credit, it's not like he's just talking hypothetically. His own company, MicroStrategy, has become something of a Bitcoin treasury company, investing heavily in Bitcoin over the past few years. And guess what? It's been wildly successful, even outperforming companies like NVIDIA.
Yeah, MicroStrategy's performance is a really interesting case study. They've essentially put their money where their mouth is, so to speak. They raised funds through things like convertible notes and share offerings specifically to buy Bitcoin. And their gamble seems to have paid off. They were even recently added to the NASDAQ 100 index, which is a pretty big deal for a company that was primarily known for software just a few years ago.
So their real-world success does lend some credibility to Saylor's vision for a national Bitcoin reserve.
It does, but it's also important to remember that what works for a single company might not translate perfectly to a national level. The scale is different, the risks are different, and the potential for unintended consequences is much higher.
Good point. So we've got Trump pushing for it, Saylor making the case for it, and MicroStrategy demonstrating its potential. Seems like a lot of pieces are falling into place. But
It's all too good to be true. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
exactly. Saylor's projections are exciting, but let's be real. We need to approach them with a healthy dose of skepticism.
I think so. It's easy to get caught up in all the hype, especially when you're talking about figures like $280 trillion and the potential to just wipe out the national debt.
Right.
But we need to kind of step back and really scrutinize those claims.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that a U.S. Bitcoin reserve does become a reality. Could it really offset the national debt? What are the implications for the U.S. dollar globally? And are there any potential downsides we need to be aware of?
Let's start with that national debt question. While Saylor's projections suggest a potential offset, it's really crucial to remember that Bitcoin's price is notoriously volatile.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all seen those charts with the dramatic spikes and dips. Relying on something like that to solve a complex issue like national debt carries some inherent risks.
So it's not like a guaranteed fix.
Not even close. It's a highly speculative asset, and its future value is uncertain. A Bitcoin reserve could generate significant returns, but it could also lead to losses if the market takes a downturn.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about the impact on the U.S. dollar? Could a Bitcoin reserve threaten its global standing?
This is where things get really interesting. There are arguments on both sides.
Okay.
Some experts believe a Bitcoin reserve could actually strengthen the dollar by signaling U.S. leadership in the digital asset space. They argue that it would show a willingness to embrace innovation and position the U.S. at the forefront of the global financial system.
So a kind of lead-by-example approach, showing the world that the U.S. is serious about embracing digital assets.
Exactly. But on the flip side, there are concerns that it could undermine the dollar's dominance if it's seen as a move away from those traditional financial systems.
Right.
Some countries might perceive it as a threat and accelerate their own efforts to diversify away from the dollar, potentially creating a more fragmented global financial landscape.
That's a fascinating point. It's like a geopolitical chess match,
Wow.
with countries trying to anticipate each other's moves and position themselves for advantage in this new digital economy.
Precisely. And speaking of geopolitics, we have to consider how other countries might react to the U.S. holding a significant Bitcoin reserve.
Right, where they see it as a power play, a threat.
It's likely to trigger a range of reactions. Some countries might see it as a threat and accelerate their own efforts to acquire Bitcoin, almost like an arms race for digital assets. Others might view it as validation of Bitcoin's importance and follow suit,
Right.
creating a global scramble for Bitcoin.
Wow, this is getting pretty intense. It sounds like a Bitcoin reserve could have far-reaching consequences, both positive and negative.
Absolutely. We're talking about potentially reshaping the global financial landscape.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about those potential downsides we mentioned earlier. What should we be cautious of?
Well, one concern that's often raised is the environmental impact of Bitcoin mining.
Yeah.
It's a very energy-intensive process, and scaling up a national reserve could exacerbate those concerns if we're not careful.
That's a good point. We've discussed the environmental costs of Bitcoin before on this show, and it's definitely something to consider carefully.
Another risk is the potential for market manipulation. If the U.S. government holds a significant portion of the Bitcoin supply, it could influence the market in ways that benefit certain players and disadvantage others.
That makes sense. So there would need to be a robust regulatory framework in place to ensure transparency, fairness, and accountability.
Absolutely. A Bitcoin reserve would require a level of oversight and regulation that we haven't really seen before in the crypto space. And striking that balance between fostering innovation and protecting against potential abuse is going to be a major challenge.
This is a lot to process. We've
Yeah.
covered a lot of ground here, from Trump's changing stance to Saylor's ambitious projections
Yeah.
and the potential benefits and risks of a Bitcoin reserve.
What's fascinating is how this discussion connects to those broader trends we've been seeing in the crypto space. It's like a microcosm of the evolving understanding and acceptance of digital assets on a global scale.
Yeah.
We're witnessing a shift from the fringes to the mainstream, with governments, institutions, and individuals increasingly recognizing the transformative potential of cryptocurrencies.
It really is remarkable how much things have changed in just a few short years. Bitcoin went from being seen as this niche technology, almost a novelty in some circles, to now being discussed in the context of national reserves and trillions of dollars in potential value.
And that rapid evolution underscores the importance of staying informed and engaged.
Right.
The world of finance is changing, and understanding these shifts is crucial for anyone looking to navigate the future of money and investment.
Certainly given us a lot to think about. So to wrap things up, we've explored this whole idea of a U.S. Bitcoin reserve fueled by Trump's support, Saylor's optimistic projections, and Senator Loomis's concrete proposal to purchase 200,000 Bitcoin every year until they hit a reserve of 1 million Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We've talked about the potential benefits like economic growth, debt reduction, and global leadership in this new digital age.
For sure.
But we've also highlighted some of the risks, like volatility, market manipulation, and of course that environmental impact of Bitcoin mining that we always need to keep in mind.
It's a lot to weigh.
It's crucial to remember that we're still in the early stages of this conversation.
Yeah.
A lot can change between now and any potential implementation.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes this so exciting. We're kind of witnessing history in the making, the birth of a new financial era.
It does feel that way.
The key takeaway, I think, for our listeners is that this isn't just about Bitcoin. It's about this broader shift towards digital assets and their growing role in the global economy.
Right.
Regardless of whether a U.S. Bitcoin reserve actually becomes a reality, the conversation itself signals a significant shift in how we think about money and value.
I think that's a really important point.
And that brings us back to those eye-popping figures from that Forbes article by Billy Bambro, a potential $280 trillion expansion of global digital capital markets, the U.S. potentially offsetting its debt and becoming this dominant force in the digital asset landscape. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's hard to even wrap your head around those numbers.
It really is. It paints a picture of a very different future, one where digital assets play a central role in shaping economic power and global financial systems.
It's definitely something to watch closely.
So, given everything we've discussed, here's a final thought-provoking question for you, our listeners. What do you think the long-term implications of a U.S. Bitcoin reserve could be? Not just for the U.S., but for the entire global financial system.
Yeah, it's a question worth pondering as we all continue to navigate this uncharted territory.
Absolutely. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspectives. And as always, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on future episodes. As we continue to explore this ever-evolving world of crypto.